Hello and welcome to my Model Corner project number 10 on the Max Afterburner channel. For this chapter we'll be building, painting, and detailing the venerable A-10 Thunderbolt II. You probably are already aware it is often referred to as the Warthog or simply Hog due to its less than glamorous looks. If you've ever been to the state of Arizona, and in Tucson in particular, you know that the A-10 is a very common sight in that local airspace. This is because Davis-Monthan Air Force Base is the home to two A-10 units. DM was the very first base to receive the newly minted jets at the time. The first time I ever saw A-10s, they were in their multi-green colored camouflage, as their original role was to destroy tanks in the European theater, but starting around the time of Desert Shield and Desert Storm, they have been in the aircraft gray. The Tamiya A-10 summary declares that the Thunderbolt II proved itself in the recent Gulf War, so this kit must have been originally released in the early 1990s. I could go with the easier gray scheme, or I can take on more of a challenge by selecting the 3 shaded camouflage. I've already noticed that this set is not quite up to the standards of Tamiya model kits today. There are some flaws both in accuracy and the approach to some of the details. For example, there is this mixture of recessed and raised panel lines on the wings and tail surfaces, and the detail throughout is not all that special. I do have some new tools I picked up at the 2018 IPMS that should come in handy to deal with the panel lines, but it is extra prep work that I wasn't expecting. I can use the photo edge saw to scribe in the panel lines and the ruler to guide me. I can also use tape as a straight edge for uneven surfaces. It took about an hour to scribe over the raised panel lines on each wing. I also had to scribe the tail on both the vertical and horizontal surfaces. The actual first construction step is the bonding of the center fuselage halves. Tamiya notes that you'll need about 45 to 50 grams to offset the tail-heavy configuration, but they supply no ballast. You can use 20 modern US pennies, which are essentially zinc slugs, to match the 50-gram amount. While that sets, we can work on the nose gear bay. I'm almost out of glue in this Tamiya thin cement bottle. You can extend the brush at that point before resorting to transferring the remainder to another bottle. The cockpit lacks detail, and the kit relies on decals to supply the instrument panels and dial faces. The engines also lack detail, but they'll be hidden away within the cowlings. Unfortunately, the cowlings also have raised panel lines, which will require scribing. There is a flaw in the wing flaps. A large gap is created when the lower and upper halves of the wing are joined. There should be a bend in the flaps at these points, not a gap. We'll need to add filler and blend in the shape. Although most of the engines will not be visible, I add a coat of paint with emphasis on the aft ends. I do a lighter coat on the body while allowing some of the darker color plastic to show through to simulate shadows and discoloration from heat effects on the metal. I thinned out the remaining paint in this bottle so it looks a little extra wet here. You'll notice that once the engines are installed in their housings, the forward circumference edging is a bit uneven. Luckily, the leading edge lip covers this up as demonstrated during the dry fit check. We can address the painting of the fan blades prior to completing construction of this area, after which it will be difficult to do our detailing work. I dry brush in white paint to highlight the fan blade edges, and this also simulates reflected light on those surfaces. Our plastic construct is starting to look more like an A-10 after adding the engines to the main body, but we still have a ways to go. We can now temporarily add panels to both protect internal areas from overspray and also line up our camouflage paint scheme should there be more than one color affecting these doors. While we're at it, I'll add the pod for laser-guided bombs. Now we'll protect open areas that don't have paneling. Although the molded plastic is already dark, I don't think it provides a good base color. I'll use the darker NATO black paint, and this also creates a primer coat to work with. So while we do that, let's roll the A-10 specifications, cue up our rain and thunderstorm sound background once again. I apologize for some odd camera glitches that occurred during this black shading portion. I'll be back with you on the other side of this segment. Our black shading primer coat is complete and our woodland paint scheme will be composed mostly of dark colors. I decided to experiment by doing some marbling that will create a sun-bleached effect of our main camouflage layers on the jet. For those playing at home and want to use floating paper templates, I have calculated that the enlargement factor of the instruction sheets to the actual model size is 2.23 times, or 223%. You can use this ratio whether you scan the instruction sheets in your computer or simply photocopy them. I prefer to start airbrushing the lightest colors of the patterns first, so we'll cut out the templates to protect the darker areas to begin with. One of the limitations of paper templates is that they are printed from two-dimensional images, but we have a three-dimensional model. Adjustments are needed, particularly with curved surfaces. The cylindrical nature of the cowlings about the engines pose the greatest challenge. You'll note I used masking tapes in these areas to compensate. During airbrushing, I lifted these tape edges a bit to facilitate creating the feathered edges. Now that we've finished our third color, we can examine the entirety of the model to determine if any corrections are needed to our overall paint scheme. I did note that the instruction guide did not match the actual images of the A-10. The very front of the nose should be camouflage 1 and not number 3 as illustrated by Tamiya. You'll see I rectified this in later clips. We can do some other side work while we wait for the paint to cure on the main body of the jet. Here we can take the opportunity to add some simple but nice detail. Rather than going with the molded dimples, we can use the pin vise to drill out the exhaust holes of the 30mm cannon. Prep work for airbrushing is completed for finer details such as the bomb and missile band markings, the canopy frame, and some tail flash design for the vertical stabilizers. This is just a quick shot of airbrushing the front canopy and then the reveal of the aft canopy and frame. Most of our attachments are now completed. To begin detailing, I'll start with some wash on the landing gear. Generally, landing gear equipment is kept relatively clean. The white surfaces ensure that any leak of hydraulic fluid is more visible and maintenance can be implemented. So in this case, our aim is to bring out detail by highlighting areas of shadow that would be more noticeable in real-life scale. Likewise, we hit the landing gear doors. We can also take the opportunity to put some grunge on the pylons and rails that carry the missiles and bombs. Now on to the wash and weathering of the A-10. This is usually the point where projects turn around for me. The model has a nice paint job and the construction looks good, but the detailing is where the model comes to life. I prefer the used look. To me, it adds realism that makes anyone take notice. I create a mixture of black oil paint mixed with mineral spirits to obtain my wash. I concentrate on areas of panel lines, protrusions, and joints where shadows would exist, such as the landing gear housing and the wing. Since I had described the lines, I prefer to finely detail wash using cotton swabs to have more control over the effects. I cleaned at angles to prevent lifting the wash back out of the crevices. Then I fine-tuned the cleaning around the areas and finally performing the last strokes in the direction of airflow across the jet's surfaces. Before I forget, I removed my overspray protection for the landing gear bays. Now for the most important area, the upper exterior of the Thunderbolt. This is usually the most readily viewed vantage point of any aircraft model. I continue with the same steps of the wash as we did on the sides and the bottom of the aircraft. My wash was a little too thick in places here, so I added some clean mineral spirits to the cotton swab to remove the dried excess. You'll note how the wing is a little extra wet. Finally, this in-progress shot gives you an idea how the wash on the outer right wing as compared to the root of the wing gives the exterior more character. The tail lettering options available on the decal sheet are units that were all inactivated at about the same time in late 1992. Not surprisingly, I'm going to make custom decals for an A-10 based at Davis-Monthan. Therefore, we need to manufacture the DM tail letters, the Thunderbolt symbol on the tails, the 355th wing emblem on the starboard side, the 357th Squadron insignia for the port side. We start by sizing the images to the correct dimensions of the 48 scale A-10. You should create duplicates in case of any mishaps during the application process to the model. We will then be ready to print out to the blank decal sheets. I apply a Tamiya mark fit, but I didn't like the fact that some of the emblems began to melt into the model immediately and didn't give me the time to adjust the positioning as I'm accustomed to with microset and microsol. And here we work the lightning bolt tail flash and DM markings plus the tail number. Working inward, we add pylons, rails, missiles, landing gear, and bombs. Taking breaks in between additions, we can work on bonding our bombs to their associated racks. Here come the Mavericks! Then we set up our landing gear. These weren't too bad, but adding the aft doors to the main gear was a bit tricky. Now we can add our nose gear. It's getting pretty hairy in here with all the attachments. Something is bound to get knocked off. Finally, we add all 12 of our Mark 82 bombs. And for a moment of truth, we find the ballast is indeed enough to keep the aircraft balanced. Before we install the final glass pieces, it's time to add a dull coat to even out the overall tone of the model. I wasn't entirely thrilled with this kit, and I'd like to visit this subject again with another manufacturer and also try out the gray paint scheme. We're almost done and ready to haul this jet out for review. Stay tuned at the very end to get a sneak peek at what project number 11 will be. Take care, and we'll see you later.